Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video on the Gooners and Gloves Podcast channel. In today's video, it's going to be the 66th Gooners and Gloves Podcast, and I'm going to be giving you guys my thoughts and reactions to the Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn fight. I just got finished watching it literally about 10 minutes ago. That's literally 10 minutes ago is when the scorecards were read out, and oh my word, what an incredible fight. That's one of the greatest fights that I've ever watched. I'm still absolutely speechless. What an incredible fight. An instant classic, a barn burner, a fight of the year contender, and just an absolute war. What a fight. A complete war between two absolute warriors. Incredible fight. I absolutely love this sport. I'm so passionate about it. I love boxing so much, and it's fights like this that really remind me exactly why I love this sport so much. Without a doubt, both Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn did their fathers proud tonight, and that was incredible. One of the best fights that I've ever seen live, and I'm so honored and so happy and blessed to have watched that fight live. And this is definitely the sort of fight that I'll be remembering in years to come, and even telling my future kids about, because it's an incredible fight, one of the best that I've ever watched. So I'm just going to go on and get into how the fight went, and just basically talk about how the fight went, how the fighters did, what I thought they both did well. I'm going to go over how I scored the fight, and ultimately just kind of my thoughts on the whole event. That being said though, if you want to see my thoughts on the other fights, because I did watch the entire card and I also scored the entire card, go over to my YouTube shorts, and on there I'll be posting my scorecards for every single fight and also what I thought of every single fight. But in this video I'm just going to focus on the Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn fight. So let's jump straight into this. So obviously the ring walks were really cool from both men. Obviously Conor Benn came out confident, he came out excited. Chris Eubank Jr. actually came out to simply the best, which was awesome. I definitely was so happy when I saw that, because obviously, if you guys don't know, his father's nickname was Simply the Best, and that's the song that he walked out to. So both men's ring entrances were really cool, and you could just tell they were both up for it for sure. Like, you could tell from their ring walks that both men were absolutely up for this. They both knew how much it meant, and it was just I was gassed. I can't lie. I was so excited. Obviously Tottenham Hotspur Stadium was absolutely rocking, and the fight absolutely delivered. There's no question about that. So in terms of what the outcome was, so Chris Eubank Jr. won by unanimous decision. All three judges scored it 116-112, and that's actually exactly what I scored it as well. I also scored it 116-112, so I agreed with the judges on this one, and I actually got it correct. My prediction was Eubank Jr. to win by points, and that's exactly what happened. And in fact, I actually had a really good night when it came to predictions, because I predicted all 5 fight winners correct, and I predicted 4 of the 5 outcomes correctly. So all 5 winners I got right. And then 4 of the outcomes I got correct. Just one of the outcomes I didn't. The only outcome that I didn't get correct is that I said Yard would win by KO TKO, but he actually won by points. But anyway, as I said before, if you want to see all of my thoughts on all of the fights and my scorecards, check out the shorts where I'll be uploading about all of the fights. But anyway, let's get into how I scored the fight. So the first round I gave to Conor Benn 10-9, and that was just because obviously the first round nobody really landed anything. Naturally, we were both kind of just feeling each other out, but Conor Benn was without a doubt the more active fighter, so for that reason I gave the first round to Conor Benn, just really only just on sheer activity. I can't really say he landed more or Chris Eubank landed more. It was kind of just on sheer activity, if you get what I mean. So the first round, not really too much to talk about here. That's how I scored it, 10-9. I think most people would agree with Benn winning the first round, just because neither of them really landed much of anything, so by default Benn kind of just gets the round because of his activity. But then Eubank Jr. came back, and in round 2 I scored it 10-9 for Chris Eubank Jr. I thought in this round he had a bit more success and he began to kind of land his punches, but to be fair, you could even argue that Benn won the first 2 rounds. Basically the first 2 rounds were kind of just slow from both men and kind of just feeling each other out. Benn was obviously the aggressor, Chris Eubank starting to slowly find his rhythm. So first 2 rounds were kind of the same story, just Benn being quite aggressive and trying to land those big haymakers early, and Chris Eubank Jr. kind of taking his time, being patient, and just kind of slowly but surely working out Benn's tempo, which obviously, as expected, as I said in my prediction, I definitely expected Benn to come out faster, and that obviously unsurprisingly happened. Benn came out early with the swings, the wild haymakers, etc., but as we saw by the end of the fight, both of them were throwing absolute bombs, absolute haymakers, and it was just an absolute scrap. It was an amazing, and it really brought us back to like the old school era of boxing, back when it was 15 rounds and just brutal, because it generally felt like that kind of fight. So round 2, Eubank had a bit more success, so for that reason I gave it to him. Round 3 I'd say is the first significant round of the fight, because this is when Conor Benn was actually able to hurt Chris Eubank Jr., and for that reason I did give the round to Conor Benn. So Conor Benn landed a beautiful left hook, a really good left hook right on the forehead of Chris Eubank Jr., and it hurt him. Obviously he recovered well, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he was like on the verge of getting knocked out or anything, but his legs definitely buckled. He was hurt for a second, but credit to Chris, he calmed down, he relaxed himself, he bit down on his gum shield, and he was able to get through the round, and in fact he even landed some good shots of his own. But Conor Benn definitely landed a great hook to the temple, so sorry, not the temple, the forehead, and so for that reason, without a doubt, the round for me was a Conor Benn round. However, in my opinion, the most significant part of the fight, and for me, what actually won Chris Eubank Jr. the fight, was rounds 4 to 8. For me, this stretch of 5 rounds between 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, this is what, in my opinion, won Chris Eubank Jr. the fight, because these are actually the 5 rounds that I gave to Chris Eubank Jr. consecutively. Now, I think by this point is when 2 things happened. First of all, Chris Eubank Jr. began to finally find his tempo. I think his combinations were fantastic. He was landing really good shots. The uppercut in particular was an absolutely devastating punch, but the 1-2s were also really good. And I think this is when he was just beginning to frustrate Benn with his effective boxing, his slick style, his slick boxing, and just his fantastic counter punching and also combinations. Obviously, I did say in my prediction that counter punching and combinations and timing were going to be a big thing for Chris Eubank Jr. in this fight, and he definitely demonstrated that between rounds 4 and 8. I think he landed really good counter punches, really good timed shots. So I thought it was fantastic work from Chris Eubank Jr. in these 5 rounds. And for me, I ended up giving him all of these rounds because I thought he outboxed Benn, he did better, and he was just landing some really heavy shots. And this is definitely when Benn was starting to get frustrated. One thing I must say about these two is that they were talking to each other a lot in this fight. I don't think I've ever seen 2 fighters talk to each other as much as these two did in this fight. Genuinely, all 12 rounds they were just going back and forth with the words, and it was the referee even had to split them up at multiple points and warn them just because they were talking so much. So yeah, but obviously it's a big rivalry, it's unsurprising. They're obviously both showmen, so unsurprisingly they were talking. But yeah, rounds 4 to 8 was fantastic from Eubank Jr. I think his uppercut was working really well, his 1-2s, his movement was really effective. I think his punches, his combinations, his counter punching, his timing, everything was just really good. Benn was certainly still in it at this point, don't get me wrong. Benn was still throwing the haymakers, landing the punches, etc. But I just think this was the point in the fight where Chris Eubank completely took control and, for me, just completely, essentially, not dominated, but in terms of obviously winning the rounds, he dominated, but the rounds were still close, but I do definitely feel they were clear-cut enough to where Chris Eubank Jr. won them. So it was a really, really good performance in this round from Chris Eubank Jr. in these 5 rounds. So for me, these are the 5 rounds that won Chris Eubank Jr. the fight. For me, by this point, he built up a pretty sizable lead. Heading into the 9th round, it was 6-2 for me, where I had 6 rounds to Chris Eubank and only 2 to Conor Benn. And so for that reason, I definitely think that this was the point in the fight where it kind of changed, the tide changed, the fight changed, and this is when Chris Eubank Jr. completely took control. And don't get me wrong, Conor Benn came back really strong in rounds 9 to 10, but I think by this point, Conor Benn was really frustrated, and you could definitely see by the end of that 8th round that he was really frustrated. And it definitely, for me, Chris Eubank Jr. was just so good in these, rounds 4 to 8. Beautiful combinations, really good movement, great punches, great counters, and just really, really was doing well to kind of, frustrate Benn, and the talking I could tell was definitely working from Chris Eubank, because throughout the whole night, Eubank Jr. was talking to Benn, and it really began to annoy Benn. You could see him at multiple points getting annoyed, giving it back, swinging, etc. And that's really good for Chris Eubank Jr. because obviously Chris Eubank Jr. is a great counter puncher, and so and there's no better fighter to fight when you're a counter puncher than an angry fighter, someone who's angry, annoyed, and you could tell that Conor Benn was definitely annoyed, and that was starting to work for Chris Eubank Jr. as he was landing the counter punches. But anyway, to be fair to Conor Benn, it was a really good response from him in rounds 9 to 10, because these are the 2 rounds that I thought he won, and for me, these are the 2 that he won quite convincingly. So in round 9, he actually hurt Chris Eubank Jr. again. It was a really good, I think it was a right hook this time, so really good right hook that landed perfectly flush. I think it was a good straight right hand as well. So yeah, it was a hook and a right hand, and those hurt Chris Eubank quite considerably, and he definitely had Chris Eubank against the rope for most of the round. So for that reason, round 9 for me went to Conor Benn, and in round 10 was a quite close round, but again, for me, definitely a Conor Benn round. It was really competitive, it was really tough, it was really torrid, but again, for me, Conor Benn did enough in those rounds to secure those 2 rounds, and for that reason, he made it a bit closer heading into the championship rounds. At this point, I had it 6-4 for Eubank, so definitely a bit closer for definitely a bit closer of a fight, and definitely in the favor of Eubank still, but obviously Conor Benn was beginning to find some success. But for me, Chris Eubank Jr. really showed his quality in rounds 11 to 12. So at this point for me, it was actually 6-4 for Eubank Jr. So if Conor Benn had won these 2 rounds or even gotten a knockdown, he could have taken the fight. But Chris Eubank Jr., very clearly aware of this, turned up the tempo completely in rounds 11 to 12. And these 2 were just incredible. These 2 rounds were absolutely unreal. And this just came down to who wanted it more, honestly. At this point, there was no technique, there was no skill. It was literally just pure slugfest, pure swinging. And it really felt like the old days of boxing. And I just want to give so much respect to both men. They put on an absolute barnstormer and these last 2 rounds, I could not believe the pace that these two were still going at. They were still going at such a fast, such an electric, such a rapid pace, and I just could not believe how incredible the pace still was at this point. It's just unreal how fast these guys were still punching, how fast they were still moving, how much they were still swinging, and it just showed how much they both wanted it. So rounds 11 to 12. However, that being said, as much as the rounds were close and as much as they were both swinging for the fences, for me, I did feel in these 2 rounds that Chris Eubank Jr. landed more and also was the more effective aggressor. You know, Benn was kind of just fighting on pure will at this point, whereas I think with Eubank Jr. there was still a bit of technique there was still a bit of skill, he was still kind of, you know, picking his shots, etc. Whereas for Benn, I definitely felt that in these last 2 rounds he was kind of just fighting on will. And so the fight came to an end. The entirety of Tottenham Hotspur Stadium erupted in applause, and well deserved. Honestly, whatever money they made tonight, they earned it tonight. I know we all frown upon how much these athletes are paid, but tonight, without a doubt, they earned their money. Good for them. They earned their money. They gave us an absolute barnstormer. In my opinion, so far, the fight of the year. You know, this even was better than Boatsy versus Smith, better than Beterbiev versus Bivol. This was just an unreal fight and one of the greatest fights that I've ever watched. Absolute barnstormer, and I want to give nothing but respect to both men. The whole night of boxing was really entertaining. All in all, we got to enjoy 60 rounds of boxing because obviously all 5 fights went to the scorecards. And as I mentioned before, if you want to see my thoughts on the other fights, please check out my shorts. I'll be telling you guys on the shorts all of the different scorecards that I gave, how many of the predictions I got right, which obviously I already told you guys. I got all winners correct and 4 of the 5 outcomes correct, so a really good performance by me on the predictions. However, I'll also be telling you guys exactly how I scored each fight, all of the scorecards, etc. So if you want to see all of that for the other fights, please check it out. But without further ado, that's gonna finish off my analysis of this fight. So it's a massive win for Chris Eubank Jr., who now has opened himself up to some huge fights. Obviously a devastating loss for Conor Benn, but without a doubt a very good showing from Conor Benn. Don't get me wrong, a very, very good showing, and considering the size disadvantages he had, I thought he did really well. So props to Conor Benn, definitely a good performance from him. However, without a doubt, Chris Eubank Jr. deserved that win. I agreed with the judges. All 3 of them gave it 116, 112. That's what I also scored it. So yeah, a brilliant performance by Chris Eubank Jr., one of the best fights that I've ever seen, and definitely one that I won't be forgetting about for a very long time. Please let me know down below what you guys thought of it. Please let me know how you scored it, because I know there's probably going to be some people who scored it to Benn because of his aggressiveness, but I just think Chris Eubank Jr. landed the more effective shots, was the more effective aggressor, and all in all just outboxed Benn, which is what I personally predicted to happen. But anyway, I'm going to go on and wrap this one up here. Sorry, I just hit my mic stand. Apologies for that. But I'm going to go on and wrap this one up here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Absolutely incredible fight. One of the best that I've ever seen, and one that I won't be forgetting about in a hurry. But without further ado, I'm going to go on and wrap this podcast up here. Really hope you guys enjoyed it. Please let me know down below what you thought of the fight, what you thought of the other fights, and please let me know how you scored it. I'm really intrigued to see how everybody scored it. So please comment your scorecard down below. I really want to see if you guys agree with me, or if you feel that maybe it was a draw, or maybe Benn won. So please let me know. But for me personally, 116, 112 Eubank Jr. I thought Eubank won fairly convincingly, and it was a fantastic performance. But without further ado, I'll catch you guys with another podcast soon. Bye bye.